Greetings and welcome back, friends. We leave a region, South Asia, that has arguably some of the poorest countries in the world. Primarily, I suppose I'm thinking of Bangladesh. This week, we're going to spend time learning about the world's poorest region in the aggregate. I don't think there's much argument about that. And when I talk about, in total, and that's going to be Africa south of the Sahara. So we're going to get right to it. Turning your textbooks for the visual types, page 379. In this chapter, we want to recognize colonial developments. Have your lecture models, should have your lecture models printed out in your graphic organizers for your visual types. Recognize colonial development in Africa. We want to understand the various challenges for the region in the post-independence era. And with your discussion questions coming up later in the week, and with your videos, I want you to look at. You're going to need to look at for your discussion questions. And we'll be focusing on that a lot of post uh, uh, colonial occupation in Africa, and we want to become aware of South Africa. We're going to look at. We're going to talk about the different regions, subregions of Africa south of the Sahara. I'm going to probably on just a couple, and one of them is going to be Southern Africa, and specifically in Southern Africa, the country of South Africa. So we're going to become aware of South Africa's influence and progress in the region. The major heads-up terms here: the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, uh, the world's two largest lending agencies, and we're going to take a look at that, this week. Certainly with the videos. Um, how effective has that been, post-colonial Africa, in lifting Africa out of poverty? Well, based on what I just said, you probably could venture a guess, right? So that first section here, I'm going to talk about African cultures, and as I like to do, I will set this up with a little overview, and I will let you know when you can start writing. Have some notes to take, have some white space right on the lecture model right off the bat here. Oh, one last term here, apartheid. You may have heard of that. Apartheid began in South Africa, began in 1948 with the uh, uh, white colonists and basically legal segregation. The majority blacks were segregated from the rest of, well, power, power and prestige. They were kind of cut off from that, from the the from the minority. So majority rights were basically basically controlled under the system. It ostensibly ended in 1994. So talk about that a little bit more. Looking at the overview here, Africa south of the Sahara is a region of tremendous diversity and natural beauty. Yet it's a region with profound and unfortunately widespread problems. Despite having a wealth of natural resources, political instability, ethnic divisions, and health crises have combined to make the people of the region among the poorest of the world. Half the population lives on less than $1, $1 a day, and the region's overall economic strength relative to other world regions has declined. No question about it over the past 50 years. The region is remarkably, and arguably the most culturally complex of the world's regions. You have more than 1,000 languages that are spoken there, a majority of which belong to the Niger-Congo group. As with the language, there's a great diversity of religion. You have numerous traditional animistic beliefs. are widespread. Islam is strongest in the north and east, and Christianity is found throughout the rest of the region, and a lot of that is kind of syncretistic um, with some local native beliefs. The region's tremendous religious diversity has surprisingly not been a source of widespread conflict, as many faiths coexist. Um, and then you have, I would say that when you start getting in to the northern part of Africa, sub-Sahara, you do have some conflicts with Islam and Christianity. Life in Africa, south of the Sahara, has been profoundly shaped by external forces, which we'll dwell on. You had expansion of Arab Muslims from Southwest Asia in the 7th century AD, and that affected both the culture and economic organization of the north and east. Starting in 1400s, European powers established a lot of coastal outposts, which facilitated slave, ivory, and gold trade. European colonial control eventually grew to encompass the entire region. And it was not until the 1950s that most African colonies began to achieve their political independence, mid to late 50s, early 60s. Got some notes here. Let's take a look at African cultures, right? African cultures and African ethnic diversity. We'll start that off with African cultures, bullet point, African ethnic diversity and shared cultures. African ethnic diversity and shared cultures. And then the first bullet point under that, more than 1,000 languages are spoken south of Sahara. The Niger-Congo group is the largest. And for this section too, you can turn to figure 9.8 on page 317, or 387, I'm sorry, 387, can't read my writing, 387, and over at page 388 too, there's a map that corresponds to this. Second bullet point there, right after that, would be shared features of African beliefs, shared features of African beliefs, there's a close relationship between humans, nature, and spirits. Close relationship between humans, nature, and spirits. Third bullet point, everyone is part of a continuing chain of life. Wisdom and strong leadership is respected. Everyone's part of a continuing chain of life. Wisdom and strong leadership is respected. And then last point here, many faiths coexist. They coexist without tension between, rank and file members, your congregants, your believers. Colonial regimes. You see slave trade there. And you see some fill in the blanks coming up here. The Portuguese. The Portuguese were the first Europeans to establish a regime south of the Sahara based off the slave trade. Europeans justified enslaving different skin colors, assuming racial superiority. Page 378, you can turn there for this next bullet point. Liberia. Liberia began when former slaves went through humanitarian efforts. They had trouble integrating with those back in Liberia who were not slaves. Abraham Lincoln got involved in this as well, sending black slaves from the South, if they desired, back to Africa. But this is where the country of Liberia, by and large, began. through this in this humanitarian endeavor. And surprisingly, and it's kind of a side note here, surprisingly, most, to me anyway, surprisingly, most African slaves, here in the American South, um, did not, decided not to, they wanted to stay here and make a go at it, post slavery days. So you have Liberia, page 378, you can see that. And figure 910. Figure 910 has a map of the slave trade. Nice visual there as well. So you have explorers and colonies too. Explorers and colonies. Colonial government built roads and railroads to connect interior mines and plantations with the ports, right, for trading. Well, the colonists who settled, let's take a look at South Africa. Colonists who settled, the Dutch built Cape Town to support ships trading with the Dutch West Indies. And you take a look at a map of the continent of Africa, Cape Town is pretty close to the tip, right, in South Africa. After the Boer War, right, Boer, should have had that maybe one of the heads up terms. These were European settlers, Dutch settlers, predominantly farmers. They were farmers. After the Boer War, the Union of South Africa was formed as a self-governing dominion with the British Empire. Blacks were not included. And basically, the British, when they looked to colonize that area in southern Africa, South Africa, these Dutch farmers. There were some Germans as well, and so like some French farmers too. Um, Naturally, good old Main Street colloquialism. The British did not want them there, and those farmers didn't want to see the British. So it ended up in what they call the Boer Wars, in which um, the English won. Some other colonists that settled, and let me see if you guys have this as some white space there. I think you do, right? Some lecture notes there. Some other colonists that settled. Uh, Germans settled East Africa. Germans settled German East Africa, and they did that for coffee and tea. Coffee and tea. Um, but after World War One, it became a British protectorate. Known then as Tanganyika, which is today modern day Tanzania. If you want to be thorough about this, Tanganyika is spelled Tanganyika, right? Now it's today modern day Tanzania. Next point here, point 5, would be colonial government. Colonial government here under point 5 under colonial regimes. The French policy of assimilating Africans into the French way of life. What the French would do, they would link their colonies to the French institutions, French legal institutions, political institutions, their educational institutions, which is probably a smart thing to do. Okay, now you guys have fill in the blanks there. All right, let's see that. That's good. Africans played a small part in manufacturing development. This is key. This is a key point to what happens after the colonists leave. And this happens, all over Africa, sub-Sahara. The French policy of assimilating Africans into things like manufacturing. Africans, I can't just blame the French. Throughout the colonial regimes, Africans played a small part in manufacturing development. The mercantile system ruled out the manufacturer for local needs. So economic dependence ensued. Again, it was easy to do that. It was easy to rule out uh, the the local needs because the mercantile system was so export based, right? So export based. You had, they looked for a balance of trade, but your emphasis was on exports. Highly regulated, not really a pure form of capitalism. We've talked about that before here. That oftentimes it gets linked up with capitalism, but capitalism is hardly pure capitalism. It's not as highly regulated as the mercantile system was. But nevertheless, the Africans become kind of dependent, not kind of, they were dependent on the colonial business. So African preference for European products brought cultural dependence as well. Big points there. Let's start talking about, I want to focus on a couple of the sub-regions here. I want to start moving into West Africa. And you can turn to page 414 as I'm setting this up. You can take a look at a map of the colored map there of the region, countries. Western Africa has tremendous diversity in climate, ranging from you know, tropical rainforest, desert, and all of the countries in the sub-region became independent between the late 1950s and as late as early 1970s, with the exception of Liberia, right, 1847, and all but the Ivory Coast had long control by dictators. Another problem post colonial regimes. So for the past 25 years, 35, 40 years, almost all the countries in the subregion have experienced economic decline. So as with Central Africa, agriculture is the dominant economic activity. The coastal states, and you can see them on page 414 there, of Nigeria, Ghana, the Ivory Coast, they all have oil. They all have oil and natural gas deposits, with Nigeria being the leading producer. Manufacturing accounts for a small portion of the total economic output, and the service sector employment has been slow to develop there. Overall, economic development has been hampered by civil wars and government mismanagement throughout the region. So before we go just heaping all the blame on the European colonists, there's some other blame to go around. And if you haven't noticed, I just picked up on this after after the last chapter, kind of doing the blame game in here, right? With some of our discussion questions. So who's at fault for this? Who's at fault for that? Let's break this down. Western Africa. Western Africa, and again, should have page 414. 414 open. Western Africa, first part of Africa south of Sahara to encounter European contacts. Consists of 15 countries with populations ranging from 132 million in Nigeria to 1 million in Gambia. The 1990s saw several civil wars in Liberia, Sierra Leone, Guinea-Bissau. In Liberia, the war was between locals and those who resettled slaves. Yes, from the resettled slaves from the U.S. Now, Nigeria, you had military dictatorships that changed it from oil rich to one of the world's poorest. I mean, what a crying shame Nigeria is. Various groups took control at different times, accompanied by civil wars. Economic development. economic development. After independence, the horizon looked brighter for West Africa. Restricted economic bases, population growth, droughts, political conflicts, government mismanagement, and ever-changing world markets kind of ended those dreams, right? Ended those dreams. I want to start heading now into Southern Africa, and let me see. You can turn to page. I think it's turn to page 421. Take a look at East Africa. I'm going to talk about East Africa briefly here, and you can turn to page 421. Then I'm going to shift to page Southern Africa, and you can look at page 426 of that juncture. Eastern Africa contains two internal groupings: Ethiopia and the Muslim countries in the north, and former British East African colonies surrounding Lake Victoria. You can see that, the southern part of East Africa. Agriculture is dominant, and farm exports therefore account for majority of the subregion's exports. Manufacturing consists of between 5 and 13% of the GDP for the Eastern African countries. Kenya has a growing tourist industry, drawing around 1 million tourists per year, as you know, up to the early 2000s, or as early as the early 2000s. So that's it for Eastern Africa. Because of time, I'm going to dwell on Southern Africa, home to the region's only mid-latitude climates. Southern Africa has conspicuous economic and political differences. South Africa, the country of South Africa in that region, is by far the dominant power in the subregion, accounting for more than 75% of the GNI and the PPP. But in spite of its wealth, South Africa struggles with the economic legacy of apartheid, as the black majority, while growing in affluence, still lag economically behind their white counterparts. Political strife has plagued other countries of the subregion. Civil wars, there you go again, civil wars have ravaged Angola and Mozambique during the last quarter century of the 20th century, and ongoing into the 21st century. And land redistribution implemented by Robert Mugabe. Robert Mugabe, I'll dwell on him a little bit later, has crippled the economy of Zimbabwe. Southern Africa is the most ethnically diverse African subregion, and South Africa has a sizable, comparatively speaking, to the rest of the rest of the region, a sizable non-black population. As in the rest of Africa south of Sahara, agriculture dominates, although extensive mineral deposits are found throughout the subregion. Through the combination of power, utility, and transportation systems, South Africa has unquestionably dominated manufacturing in the southern region. In addition, service industries are on the rise in Southern Africa, including tourism, related to a lot of the subregions and national parks. Let's break this down. And now I see you do have some notes to write. And your first heading there would be Southern Africa. And first bullet point, the Republic of South Africa. I'll dwell on that for a few minutes. Republic of South Africa. And your first bullet point there under that would be because of apartheid. Because of apartheid, South Africa remained isolated from global economics until the 1990s. Because of apartheid, South Africa remained isolated from global economics until the 1990s. Although apartheid officially ended in 1994, it failed to result in economic equality. Next bullet point, former Portuguese colonies. Former Portuguese colonies, Angola and Mozambique. And Angola and Mozambique fell into civil war after the Portuguese and the Soviets left. They were client states of the Soviets and Angola with the Cubans to some degree. So both economies were in disarray. Next bullet point, the economic development. Economic development, and underneath that, you bullet point, agricultural diversity. And with agricultural diversity, subsistence farming is the norm. Subsistence farming is the norm. Corn is a staple food. Right? Staple food. Yeah, mining wealth. Mining wealth. You have extracting mineral resources. That has kept the continent connected to the global economy. South Africa is a leading producer of gold, diamonds, and iron ore. When you think about the gold, or you think about the diamonds, think De Beers, right, ladies? So you know about some of you know about De Beers, rings and so forth, right? A lot of the diamonds, probably most of them coming from De Beers and South African headquarters. It's this although is not a guarantee of prosperity. You have these economic cycles of boom and bust in wealthier countries, and that could cause global markets to fluctuate. That can also affect local incomes. And you can turn to page 432. Page 432, got a little map here to take a look at there. Now, mineral wealth in the other countries. Take a look at the other countries of Southern Africa. Mineral wealth. Mineral wealth, the mineral output makes up for about 40% of Zimbabwe's exports along a wide belt of igneous intrusion. And there we're talking about like magma crystallizing into minerals. And this is done out of the Great Dyke area of Zimbabwe, just layered with metal-bearing rock. But here's the thing, there's a chance there, obviously, of great wealth and opportunity for Zimbabwe, but political strife, right, caused it to lose, caused it to close. Not only caused it to lose, caused it to close in 2000. Just horrible, sad, so sad. So manufacturing contrasts, and let's take a look at South Africa here again. Return to South Africa. South Africa dominates in Southern Africa power utility and transportation systems. By the early part of this century, new investment was coming into South Africa. I'm thinking Levi Strauss, Nestle, Coca-Cola, and Toyota, right? Some big ones. And then manufacturing contrasts with other countries. Zimbabwe has diversified manufacturing in Southern Africa, cotton, textile plants, iron and steel mills. Factories were built by the white minority during independence. However, Robert Mugabe, I mentioned him when I was setting this section up, he has served to greatly weaken the economy. Mr. Mugabe, he gained power in 1980, and he was the liberator of the white minority rule and responsible for over 3 to 6 million deaths over the years. And he kept winning re-election there. Of course, they were, so rigged, right? It was beyond imaginable. So there you have it. Africa, sub-Sahara Africa. You just put a wrap on this if you have your graphic organizer for you visual types. You can get that out. And we talked today about Africa south of the Sahara and the cultures, right? Um, Religion and beliefs, shared features of those religion and beliefs, close relationship between humans, nature, and spirits. Everyone's part of a continuing chain of life. Wisdom and strong leadership is respected. Many faiths coexist peacefully. More than 1,000 languages. The Niger-Congo group in Central Africa is the largest. Central Africa, I really didn't highlight them much at all. If you're interested, you could read about that in your textbook. Southern Africa, South Africa, you know, apartheid left it economically isolated. Um, Apartheid ended in 1994. You have a lot of mining wealth there. They're a leading producer of gold, diamonds, iron ore, and keeps the continent connected to the global economy. Manufacturing. Uh, South Africa dominates the southern African region. Power, utility, and transportation systems. New investments. American multinational corporations have moved in. Other countries in that region, subsistence agriculture they rely on, mineral wealth kind of fluctuates according to global markets and political strife. Western Africa, right? Several civil wars, military dictatorships, government mismanagement. And then you've had your colonial regimes. The French assimilated colonies to French institutions. Portuguese were there via the slave trade. The Dutch were Dutch farmers in South Africa, leads to the Boer War with the British. British take over, apartheid begins. Germans are in East Africa. Mercantile system. Africans play a small part in manufacturing, and they develop an economic dependence on the colonists. Colonists rule out manufacturing for local needs, and again, this breeds also a cultural dependence. And then you have global and local change, the economies that, let me see, I think there may have been, maybe I'm not done with this. Global and local change, let's see, excuse me. Global and local change. Yeah, let me go back to that global and local changes. I was thinking about that in the middle of this lecture. I thought this particular section I wanted to get to. I'm thinking that I don't remember seeing. It's a fill in the blank section, global and local changes, right before Western Africa. I'm sure some of you noticed that I skipped that. Global and local changes, because this here ties into one of the themes I certainly don't want to miss this. This ties into the theme of what happened after after the colonists had left, and get my place here. Global local changes. Okay, there we go. When the when colonialism ended, the interest of the so-called allies in Africa had stopped, and heavy debts were a major reason. Yeah, there was a lot of Cold War jockeying for this region, and as you've seen, there is, as you noticed, there's a lot of mineral wealth there, right? So the Soviets and the Americans were very interested in the area. Population pressures, attempts to curb population have met with only a modicum of success. Cultural, political pressures, and ideas about male virility, large families, warfare, ethnic cleansing, uh, tribal warfare, and famines have set off population explosions. Um, shanty towns, slums, unplanned, constructed of any materials that come to hand, from packing cases to cement blocks. Um, you basically have an informal economy there. Some economic challenges. The World Bank, and the IMF restructured lending programs in the 1980s. So the emphasis there was on exporting commercial crops instead of growing food for local usage. Healthcare subsidies dwindled, and if countries do not adopt the policies, right, they lose money, they lose loans, and if they adopt them, they alienate the folks. So it's kind of a catch-22 there for people. Um, you know, if you accept loans from the IMF, people are not going to be as uh, looking for locals, looking to the locals for economic needs. But you know, if you know people are not abiding by IMF, World Bank rules, and if they're paying too much attention to maybe the local needs, they're not going to get the loans. So there's a lot of tension there between locals and the government. So there, we have that section completed, and I want to just continue wrapping up with the graphic organizer. There's global and local changes, the politics of independence, heavy debts forcing the colonies out, population pressures there, male virility, and this offsets the problem of AIDS that has beset the area. AIDS and HIV, warfare, ethnic cleansing, and famines. And you have urban and rural shifts, the shanty towns, and economics, right? Lending programs versus the subsistence local products. So the downsides, we flip the graphic organizer over. I think I gave you guys a second sheet. Downsides to African independence. Um, they gain no experience in governing. So this turns into post-colonial dictatorships, mismanagement, um, cultural, economic independence. They really weren't. I don't know how else to say this. They weren't trained on purpose to develop their own economic needs. Mercantile system played into that. And the boundary lines, right? We didn't talk too much about that, but the boundary lines after the colonists left, colonists drew up a lot of boundary lines. And so when the colonists left, you had, there were boundary issues before the colonists came. Now that was doubled. That tension was doubled. So the recarving of boundary lines lead to a lot of tribal warfares. So let's take a look at what's up ahead. You're going to have a textbook exercise, kind of going back over these points. It's called Reading Guides. And when you open up that exercise in Canvas, I have some directions there on how to do a reading guide. I don't remember, recall us doing one this semester. It's going to be pretty obvious. You're going to have some text explicit questions and text implicit questions, and I explain how to do that. It's fairly simple. That will be due Wednesday night. I'm going to have videos this week, and I'll have all this ready to go. You know, probably is already ready to go by the time you guys look at this. Videos, there's several of them. They're very short again, but they really deal with um, what's happened in certain areas after the colonists have left, right? And I'm going to need to see your grade is going to be affected by if I see some of this cited um, in um, in your discussion questions. You need to be citing from the lecture models, of course, and the textbook. In the news, of course, right? We do Thursday night. That is ready to go as I speak, and the discussions, and then we'll quiz on Monday. And I think that's it. Now I'm going to be let's see. I'm going to be looking at uh, bringing in possibly a reading, but I'm still thinking that through. So, but anyway, you guys know how to get a hold of me, and if you have questions, comments, concerns, and I'll talk to you next week. Okay, so you guys have a fantastic week, and do well. All right.